Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to paint a coneflower, and really simple. I am pre-painting my canvas black, but you could do this on a white canvas or you could do it on a painted color canvas. Whatever background color you want is totally fine. It is up to you. And I just recommend having, for just painting the flower part, I recommend having a couple of round paintbrushes. So one that's a little bit bigger and one that's a little bit smaller. So I'm using a number 4 and a number, I think it's 8. So something that's similar to that is going to be good. And we're going to just start by layering our flower petals and positioning everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my bigger brush first, and I'm going to make some pink. So I'm going to mix white and red. And I want kind of like a darker shade of pink. So I'm using white, especially since I'm on a black canvas. And remember, this is completely dry. I'm not getting too crazy here. You don't want it to be wet, otherwise it will be hard to layer. And you want to always have a little bit of white mixed in, even if you want a darker shade. So I have white and red, and just make sure it doesn't look too light at first. And then we're going to find the middle of the canvas. I'm going to go top and bottom, right and left, and then just make a little dab there so you know where the middle of the canvas is. And then I'm going to make my petals come from this space, but they're only going to be coming from the center down. I'm not putting any petals up because I want the petals to be like coneflower style. So what I like to do is I like to point my brush where my petal is going to start and then pull it towards the center. So I'm pointing the tip of the brush, and I'm going to go a little bit off to the left, and I'm just barely touching it first so it's a little bit pointy, and then I push a little harder as I pull towards the center point. And then you get a nice little petal. And then I'm going to keep doing that. So I'm going to do another one. Pull, and then come down. And then they're going to get a little bit shorter as I come through the middle. And then we get a little longer again as I pull to the side. You can kind of layer over. You can come in and add a little extra if you need to, or just change the shape, make them a little thicker. I'm just fine tuning it a little bit. And then, you don't want it to be look perfect. So sometimes people will do these things and it's like so symmetrical and every petal is exactly the same. You really don't want to do that because that's not really what flowers look like. So they have little imperfections if you really pay attention. That's what makes them really interesting. Now for the top part, we want there to be like a center to the flowers. So what I can do is just make little dabs that go up in a rainbow above the flowers, the petals. And then again, these are coming all together here. And then I'm making a rainbow to test happening. And then you can pull down just a little bit, but I want it to actually be dark at the bottom of this center part. So I don't want to pull these taps all the way down. Just poking the canvas with the tip. You can always go back and add darker colors again if it gets too bright, so don't worry about that. And then I'm simply going to add more white. And then I'm going to layer. So I'm going to make more petals, but this time I want the other ones to show underneath. So I'm going to go in between the first layer that we did. So I'm kind of going in between those shapes to make these new petals. See how they're layering on top, and you can see the ones underneath still. Because I'm going in between them. You can add as many as you want. And then you can always go back to your darker shade again if you need to. Like I kind of want to make this one darker. So I can overlay a little bit on my darker ones, and you can even add some darker shade into your lighter ones. So I can go to the kind of the top part of the petal and add just a little bit of that darker shade at the base of the petal. So all of these things are available. You can keep it really simple though. You don't have to do that much layering if you don't want to. It's really up to you. But I suggest going back and forth between your lighter and darker shades and doing a couple layers. Now this can happen right away or it can happen after it dries a little bit. It's up to you. And then I'm going to add the stem. I'm going to switch to the smaller brush to add the stem. And I'm going to do a green, and I'm going to do like a dark green at first. So I'm using mostly blue with a little bit of yellow. So it's not too bright, but I will also add a smidge of white just because it's going to help it pop on the black canvas a little bit. Not too much white though. And then I'm going to go right in the center of the flower. So make sure you're at the center, pull it down right underneath your petal in that spot, and then go straight down. I want my highlight to be on the left, so I'm going to add a little more yellow and white to my green to add a little bit of a highlight. And it's going to go just towards the left. Very subtly, very just using the tip and barely touching. You should see at least a couple different shades on the stem, and I can even go with a little bit of a darker shade again. So clean your brush in between your colors. I actually want it to be a little darker right underneath the petals. And I want even darker on the right. So I can add even more blue and maybe leave the white out and just add a little bit of paint on the right side that looks even darker. So you should see 3 shades. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add some orange to the center. So I'm going to take some red and yellow and white. Not too much white though. Notice how if I add a lot of white, it gets very peachy. So if you need to make it darker again, just add more red and yellow back in and it will go a little darker again, but it should have a touch of white mixed in. And then I'm going to tap at the top of the flower in the center. You can even use like pure red, so I can just dip my brush in the red and add some of that. And you can even use some like pure yellow. So anything in that range of colors is going to look fun tapped in there. And then you can even use some pure white at the very, very top. You can always tone it down just a little. The pure white is a little harsh. I'll leave some of it showing, but I don't want it to be too crazy. And then you want to make sure it didn't get too full of color. Like that feels a little dense to me. So I'm going to go ahead and I actually want to take a little bit more of that orange. I'm going to pull it down just a little bit into this base part, but I want to pull some darker color up. So for a darker shadow color, I can be using red and blue to make a nice purple. And then this purple can be tapped in and towards the bottom of the center to create more darkness. So I'm going to pull that up into the color just a bit and make sure it's right at the base of the flower where the petals pull to the center. And then this is really helpful if you want to create some more division between the petals. You can paint some of that purple in between the petals just using the tip, and you're almost just underlining some of those petals to keep them looking like a little more separated. And then you can even take some of that purple and have it pulling from the center out into the base of the petals just a little bit for some shading. So you don't have to do this too much. It can be very subtle, but it is helpful to have when you're doing the flowers. You want to have at least 3 shades intermixing within those petals. If they're too solid, they're not going to have enough depth. So you really want to make sure you're getting that in there. And if you want it to be more subtle, add more red to your purple. And it's going to make it a little more subtle. And then I can just sweep this on those bottom petals a little bit in the crevices, like right in between where those leaves or the petals kind of come out. Just adds a little more depth. That's kind of fun. Now, once you add that in though, you do want to make sure that you didn't get too crazy. So I would come with a clean paintbrush and come back to my pink shades. So maybe you need to add more of that darker pink back in. I'm going to do the darker shade first. And now I'm using that smaller round brush too, so I'll be able to get a little more precision. You can even reshape the petals a little bit. But basically what I'm going to do is take back some of the color if the shadow color got a little too crazy in some spots, which it usually does whenever I add it personally. So I always like to go back and forth a little bit to make sure that my shadow color doesn't become all way too overpowering. And then, so see how I could take that darker pink on top of the shadow color and you still get the shadow color, but it makes it a little softer so that it doesn't feel like a thick outline, which tends to not feel very natural. So that pink, that darker pink will soften it a bit. And then you can even take some of that darker pink and pop it into the top part. Some little dabs of that. Tiny little dabs. And then gradually add more white. Come back in with that lighter shade again. So you don't want to lose that. You can just add little stripes to the tip with the lighter color. And you can even make like a medium. Maybe it's not like the dark pink, maybe it's not the light pink either, so it's somewhere in between the light and the dark. And you can go to the tips of the darker color and just add a little bit of brightness to the tips. So all these fun little additions are just gonna give your flower a little more character. And the more different shades you have, the more interesting it's gonna look. And sometimes it looks really not good up close as you're painting it. You're like, oh, this doesn't look good. But you just gotta get some distance from it sometimes. So a lot of times I tell people, it's like, it's not as bad as you think. But remember, you can always go back to that shadow too, which is really important for creating depth. If it's too all bright colors only, then you're gonna lose a lot of interest here. So I'm gonna make sure to come in and I wanna have some little dark shading between the petals. It doesn't have to be really, doesn't have to like take over or anything, but we want it to be present. So sometimes when you go back and forth and soften, you can lose that a bit. So we're just making sure that we're not losing it. And don't forget about the lighter shades too. So you do want that in there. I'm pulling them up a little higher here because I want some of that light color to go all the way up to the base of the center. I don't want it to be too dark up there. And then you can even add like maybe some of that darker green again. And just make sure to clean your brush between your colors. So if I go into like just blue with a touch of yellow, no white or anything, and I go underneath my petal here, almost like there's a shadow from the flower cast on the stem, it's important to have that. And then again, if you need to make it a little darker on the right, which is our shadow side here, you can do that. And then you can also make it brighter with that, adding more yellow and white. And just have it barely graze the far left edge. So what I love about painting is that you can build and layer and add as many of these highlights and shadows as you like. I'm going to finish off my center with a little bit of like a brighter shade of pink, even with a little bit of a peach undertone. So it's like mostly white with a little bit of red and yellow. I'm going to give you like a peachy pink, very light. And I'm going to go to the very top of the center and give it a little tap here with the brighter color. Just at the very top. Give it a little bit of glow. And then again, you can even use pure white. Like if I just use pure white and pull that onto some of the petals. little stripes, little pops of highlight. This will just kick it up a notch and also make it look more a little shiny or something. That's what those really intense highlights do for your painting. They make it look glowy and shiny, and I like putting them in because it really boosts your contrast. And a lot of times that's what makes a painting more eye-catching, is having a good amount of contrast. So if your colors are too similar to each other, like if all your shades of pink are really reserved and similar, they're not going to really stand out against each other, and it won't give you as much contrast. Now you could just stop here and just leave it at that. I'm going to put a tiny little white butterfly on the top of the flower because I like adding butterflies. It's very fun for me. So I'm going to take my white with a tiny bit of pink. So it's okay if it has a little bit of pink mixed in, but I really want it to be almost pure white. I'm going to go to the very top of the flower, and I'm going to go almost straight vertical, maybe curving to the left just a little bit, and then curve it down and to the right. This is going to be the top wing, and then the bottom wing is going to be much smaller, tucked right underneath there. I'm going to color it in. So there's my little wings for that. I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to use the purple, the red and blue, a tiny bit of white so that it stands out on the black. And I'm going to make a little diagonal line underneath the wing for the body of the butterfly. Make sure you have a purple, and then you can even put a little circle at the top for a head. It's really dark right now, so you won't see too much until I start highlighting it. But I do want to have my back wings a really light shade of purple, so I'm doing a lot of white added into that purple. Very, very light. And I'm going to go ahead and make a parallel line. Oh, that's not dark. And we'll add a little more purple. That's too light. It should look different than your white. And I'm making a back wing. So it's like parallel at the top, and just make another little shape there. And you can always change the shapes of these things. But I will add with like the light, either like a light purple. We'll do like the light purple, and just add a little bit of a highlight to the body of the butterfly. So just go towards the top and just sweep in some colors so that it's not too dark. Like you should still see something there. And then you can even make a couple little antennae coming out the head, little curved lines coming out. Looks kind of fun. And then I would do definitely a second coat of white on the wings, the front wings. The first coat is going to be not super bright because, you know, we're painting on the black canvas. What the black paint absorbs. And now notice that second coat. The first coat should be a little bit dry before you add the second coat. It doesn't have to be 100% dry. It should be a little bit dry though. Otherwise, it won't get brighter. It will just get sloshy. And then you could use that soft purple to make some little swooshes towards the bottom of the wings. So you can pull a little texture from the back of the butterfly body into the center of the wings. And you can even like divide the wings a little bit with this color by painting a little bit around the bottom part of the wing, like to divide the top part and the bottom part of the wing, because we made two little lines coming out, little shapes. Maybe even add a little bit of a darker shade of purple coming from the back of the body into the wings, so you can always add a little bit more funness. And then I'm gonna have a little dot on the wings with purple. So red and blue, but I want it to be pretty dark. You can even do this with black if you wanted. And I'm gonna go to the top wing and just make a big dot. That. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom, but maybe not as big. And I'll do like another little dot next to it. And then an even smaller one. It's like 3 little dots. I don't know. You're making it up, you know, as you go. These things are, it's your fantasy. And then for kind of finishing touches, what I do for these kind of things is I could always take some black and like carve into the wing. Like I think I made this a little too thick, the back wing, so I'm just going to paint some black over it. Or if your little antennae got too thick, you can paint some black over it. Or if you just want to make I want to make this a little bit more pronounced between the top and the bottom of the wings. And then you can also add some more to the center, like if you want to make a little more darkness in there and that purple didn't make it dark enough. You can even add some black in between the petals. I'm not going to do that, but you could. So like if you wanted to make it a little more intense, or you can clean up the tips of your petals. So maybe you want them to be a little more pointy, or maybe your brush strokes just got a little messy, or you want them to be thinner. You can paint around the tips of the petals. I'm doing just a little bit of that because some of my petals got a little not as, I would rather them be a little bit pointier. And then you can even thin out your stem. So maybe your stem is too thick, and or you can make the shadow underneath the petal a little more intense right underneath. So there's so many things you can do in the end as you do finishing touches. So I recommend, you know, playing for as long as it feels fun. I like to keep these tutorials short and sweet.